Hello there. Welcome to Inspired to Act from Thrive Ireland. I'm Diane Holt.
And I'm Will Leach. Hello. Well done. You're in just the right place for real stories from real people, ordinary people of faith who've been inspired to take action in a host of different ways.
Our guest this time has been involved in youth ministry and peace building for 20 years or more, both locally and internationally, and in all sorts of situations. Joe McKeown is the CEO at Youthlink, which is the Interchurch Youth Service, a partnership of the Methodist Church in Ireland, Presbyterian Church in Ireland, Church of Ireland and the Catholic Church. So you're very welcome, Joe.
Yeah, it's lovely to see you, Joe. Thanks for being here.
So, Joe, you're the CEO of Youthlink. So what is Youthlink?
Well, Diane, Youthlink was set up about 1991 by youth leaders in the church, maybe people like Johnston McMaster. I think after the Enniskillen bomb, leaders from the churches came together, said, we need to do something. And they had lots of coffees together. They dreamed together. They had vision together. And it led to, conversations with government. The Secretary of State at the time said, look, guys, if you can do something meaningful, we'll invest in it. And then it led to the church leaders getting involved. And it took about 4 years of prayer, discernment, and it led to a structure of the churches working together to do two things: to train Christian leaders in youth work and ministry, and to do something about our divided society through peace and reconciliation work. So we were established in 1991, and I suppose our motto or vision statements around churches working together to empower and equip volunteers and leaders to build a different world where young people can flourish. So we're still doing that today, 35 years later. And
was it a massive deal in the early 90s, because this is well before the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, that all the churches were working together openly and not faffing around with, what do they believe, and all the traditional stuff we might have had?
I think it was monumental, reflecting back, and I don't want to be too romantic or sentimental about it, but to think about churches that don't really traditionally come together in formal structures to say, yes, we're going to partner. That was massive in the sense of institutions coming together and willing to make a public commitment to young people, but also a public commitment to their wider congregations, parishes, that we want to work together. I suppose the Irish Council of Churches was going for many years as well, the Irish Interchurch Meeting, which was an adult version, but the churches agreed to invest financially through manpower, through giving us a board of trustees. And it was quite significant when you consider, the late 80s and being the precursor to Youthlink, the violence and sectarian tit for tat, and then again the early 90s before we have a meaningful peace process. Just ordinary people saying, why don't we do this together? And I mean, what we can do together through a collective expertise will make a better service to the wider community.
So things have changed, I would imagine, over the years. I mean, I know you're involved in training people who are interested in becoming youth workers, so you've got that side of things. But can you talk a wee bit about some of the stuff on the ground that you've actually done?
I think for me, I suppose even as a young person, growing up, I was inspired by Youthlink offering training for people to better themselves in education. So as someone that was didn't have many qualifications, this is around 2000, Youthlink offered, it was an OCR in youth work. It was delivered down in the Ulster People's College. I don't even think it's there, but we went in a room with 20 other people from every background, walk of life, and for me it was one of the first times I'm sitting in the room with people that are a different religion from me, and I'm being taught by really good educators about how to serve young people in the community, and it was all framed within the Christian worldview. It was all biblically based, and I found this really wholesome and a change happening within me. So the training in itself, you can look at training, maybe it's not evangelical, it's not this, but Christ called the disciples, that kind of calling them into a journey of leadership is what I felt Youthlink was about for me. And again, we're still doing it. So we evolved at different times. We were based in a wee student house in University Street. We got funding to a big property up on the Peace Line in Springfield Road. But we also started to develop a degree programme, Youth Work with Practical Theology, which was monumental as well, to think the four churches came together. they were able to deliver their own degree programme, which was significant in the island of Ireland and UK as only one of the only Christian youth work degrees in the island of Ireland. And again, our training goes on today, like Diane and Will, around helping young people that are educationally underachieving, helping young people that are disadvantaged better themselves, but also skilled leaders within churches, volunteers, giving them the tools to work with young people, giving them the confidence.
I think it's really important as well, what you're saying, that the church was intentionally enabling people to see it through the lens of faith, because, you know, often we don't really have time or we don't ever have the ability to reflect on, okay, this is practical stuff that we need to be doing, but what is it in our faith that's actually driving us to understand why we should be doing it?
For me, it's about it's trying to develop a culture of hope, and the concept even in our vision statements about helping young people to flourish. I think that's a deeply Christian thing. We aspire to the kingdom. We want a better world. And funny, there's a saying in the Irish language, like Mullinoiga agus Chucky Shay, praise the youth and they will grow and flourish. And for me, I think Youthlink ties into that Christian spirit of, we know there's a better way. We know the potential that exists within young people. We don't look at them for their exam results or their current situation with drugs, alcohol, broken relationships. We see them what they could be through God, and we do see them all as children of God that can make an amazing difference in the world themselves. They can be, agents of change in a broken world.
Well, we like the sound of Youthlink and peace building, and how you ended up there is something we'll get to in a moment. But let's get an idea of your origins, because you've given us a hint, but I want to get a sense of where you're from, where you grew up. And as you put it, you said you didn't have many qualifications, and yet look at you now. So tell us about young Joe. Yeah,
well, a CEO is always a title I struggle with. I don't know what it would have been. So I sometimes joke about, I am West Belfast response to Margaret Thatcher, because I was born on the day that she was elected. So 3rd of May, 79. So I'm quite a monumental moment in British history, the first female Prime Minister, and again in West Belfast for me. But again, born into a bit of chaos. Young mum and dad, mum 17, dad 18. And growing up in housing executive houses and around me, an environment that was broken. But as a child growing up, you don't realise it's broken. And, often in youth groups, we ask young people about their earliest memories. And one of my earliest memories was probably around 1981-2, where a riot broke out and being in a pram. And my dad and a neighbour must have brought me home in a pram. I just have this visual image of a bit of chaos and a neighbour taking me home in a pram, or either crying in a pram. But as I went on to the end of the 80s, the normality of army up and down your streets, police stops, the tension, being a sponge for the anxiety and tension of the world around you was something that I was a magnet for the world around me, and not knowing that we lived in a broken world. For me, this was normal. One of the kind of most significant, I think, moments, Will, was around 1988. You'll remember in Andersonstown, we did Gibraltar 3 that were being buried, yes. But we'd also the atrocity of the 2 British soldiers being killed. And I remember being down
at the funeral.
At the funeral. So I remember being down the back of Andersonstown Leisure Centre. That's where me and my friends used to kick a football around, and my mum and Granny saying, "Don't you speaking up the road today, there might be trouble." And inevitably there was trouble, and people from my community brutally murdered two soldiers. Now, in the context of what was happening, there was chaos, but it was brutal, atrocity of 2 human beings. And I remember going home and watch my granny and my mum, we were sitting watching TV, and they were crying. And I couldn't for the life of me get why, because you were, in many ways, it was like the enemy had been killed, or the baddies had been killed. It was like a Western, but it struck me that their humanity in that situation was deeply challenging, and it stays with me a bit. But going on again, I talked about being a sponge for the conflict. I think I did like as a child, just take it in and really inhale it, let it consume me. And, you know, we talk about intergenerational trauma. And I'm just one child, or I'm 46, but I'm just one person. And I just think of how many others, like adults, children, who've just been sponges to conflict. Again, you get on with it, kick a football, play, throw stones at the police and army. It's normal. It's just the way it is. Even we'd snow recently, and I was talking to my kids about, I used to throw snowballs at the army as they're driving by, and they used to catch snowballs and throw them back at you. And
No.
there was just a normality about the madness, but growing up in that. And then in 1993, my best mate's dad was killed in a troubles. He had a sweet shop just beside where I lived, like Mickey Edwards, who great fella, and he was one of them dads. He was your dad because told jokes. Always wee jokes are a wee bit dodgy.
Everybody's dad's cooler than your dad.
I know, that's it. Give you a free sweet occasionally, but Mick's dad was killed just at Finicky by loyalist paramilitaries, and it just really, it broke me, and kind of like seeing like Mickey's pain, but also then starting as you're in your teens asking why, like why is this allowed to happen? And it was around that time, I suppose, it was almost like a family secret that I found out my own grandfather was shot in the troubles. And again, I'll maybe say a wee tiny bit more about that later, but I just felt angry, you know. And teenagers, you're going through your adolescence anyway, and you're trying to understand the world, but the world I lived in was unjust. There was hatred, and again, and aware even at that stage too, there was two sides. Like I remember playing football. Again, football is something I love to do, and hearing the Schenkel bomb going off in the distance and going, you know, people have died today, and it's just a bomb in the distance, and like, what are they going through? You're not even considering what they're going through. Just it was something that happened. So I think growing up, I do definitely feel impacted by the conflict and the damage it done, and like was it worth it?
Most people know that as a journalist I covered a lot of legacy court cases, and read and thought and heard testimony delivered often a few feet from where I was sitting on the press bench from people still going through terrible pain and remembering what happened, particularly in those cases, usually in the 70s. And it was in the 70s that your grandfather was shot. And it clearly wasn't talked about that much, because you said it was almost like a family secret when you heard it. But what did you subsequently learn, simply, what had happened?
I think like even at that stage, it was like, oh, your grandfather was shot by the British Army. You know, soldiers just shot him in the head. As he was going to open his shop. So my grand had 3 businesses in the local community, and he was removing like barbed wire and material just from outside his shop, and a British Army sniper just shot him once in the head, and so that was the story that we were told. My grandfather was killed by the British Army as he was about to open one of his businesses. And again, I suppose that was the only story. And I had, they done wrong. My granddad was an innocent man, and I want to do something. I think at that stage as a teen, I was becoming more and more like politicised in my views, my reading, my anger towards it. And funny, the irony of it all, it was almost directed towards the English, like the British Army. My hatred was never really, I don't think I hated Protestants or anything. I think it was almost like I hated like the British government and the army for what happened.
Nowadays we'd call it radicalised, wouldn't we?
Yeah, no, I think at that stage we lived in different times, but I mean, as a young person, and again, I was being brought up in a time where the peace process was starting, so it was. I'm not saying it was too late for me to be getting involved in anything political, but my anger didn't have enough places to be channeled. And the riots were no longer happening as much. There used to be the recreational rioting quite regularly in West Belfast, but it had eased down. But I think the process of maybe doing a deep dive or research didn't come to later, and it was connected a wee bit more to just my faith story. I think it really felt
I was going to ask
motivated
you there,
by God.
What was it that changed? Yeah, what was it that changed that anger?
Well, I suppose, as I say, teenage years wasn't good. My GCSE results were probably feed. Had to get back into school. I made lots of bad choices in my life. So I was in a dark place, like friends, suicide, and I suppose my mum and dad were part of a Catholic charismatic community at that stage, and they'd been on a retreat, the Cursillo movement, which is an international kind of Catholic movement, almost like the Alpha. So Cursillo is a short word meaning short course in Christianity. But they had done this retreat, and a few of my friends came back hammered after a night out to my house to sort out taxis and get home. And my mum and dad were just finished a prayer group at 2 a.m, as you do. And they convinced 2 of my friends to go on a retreat, like a Catholic retreat. I don't know what the equivalent is, maybe in the other Christian churches.
This is 2 hammered friends.
2 hammered friends who, they were, like, ethically they weren't under, like, they weren't given a fair deal by my mum and dad. But and actually one of the lads is currently on his final year of studying for the priesthood. But they said yes, and I was like, lads, wise up, I was pushing against it, but it came round and I went on this retreat, and it changed my life. It really, I think at that stage I had a job, and like one of them sort of low level jobs in civil service to get you started, and it changed my life. I want to see the world, and I started volunteering in youth work, and then this is where it gets a wee bit silly. I met a nun in a pub.
I feel a joke coming.
No, I met a nun at a birthday party, and in school, like, I'd been suspended 3 times. So I'd done stupid things that got me in trouble. So Sister Anne McCourt, who is a St. Louis sister and still at it with her wee walking stick still, she said, "Joe, how you doing? Like, what are you doing?" I'm like, nothing, Sister Anne. And we're setting up a wee youth group, so we are in West Belfast. Would you? And no, I wouldn't be into all that stuff. And come on, there's 2 lovely blonde twins that volunteer. I'm like, when do you start? I was like, I went and volunteered, and through Sister Anne, it exposed me just to like that idea of volunteering, but also the St. Louis sisters. Their motto is about that they be one, based on one of Christ's final prayers, that they be one. So a lot of her work was cross-community, peace and reconciliation. And there was a programme that was delivered by the Catholic Church at that stage called the New Day programme. I think the Presbyterian Church had preparing youth to be peacemakers as well. And I'd done this programme, and it kind of got rid of some of my junk, the usual flags and emblems and symbols. And everyone had to talk, like lift an item and talk about it. And I lifted the Union flag and started crying. And you don't really do that as a fella from West Belfast, in front of girls and in front of 2 blonde twins. In many ways, I'd started my faith journey at that stage, and I felt God sort of saying to me, you need to clean this junk up. You need to kind of, be a peacemaker, be a reconciler. And I felt the tears, like this flag that had so much power. There was healing that took place. I felt a real sense of, right, the time is now. And I think from that moment, I wanted to be someone that, like, met my enemies, met those that were different, but also to research my grandest story and start to get to the bottom of it. And, spent my time around that stage going to the Public Records Office, going to Belfast Telegraph and Irish News, and getting all the, you get to zoom in, I forget what you call it, but you're trying to get the news story.
Microfilm.
The microfilm, so zooming in.
I love doing that. I always love doing
fun.
that.
It was so, I don't think at that stage, it was maybe in my early 20s, and going, trying to get the story from many angles of, what happened to my granda.
And that was a year or two after the peace deal.
It was. No,
so there's all that going on.
Yes, it's all that. So the peace process is just a bit like the Derry Girls. So we've all voted for, peace, and I voted for. So it was a really good referendum choice for me at that stage to vote for it, even though it was the unknown. So I wanted to get a better understanding of the narrative from different angles. So researching and hearing the story, a lot of my family weren't really engaged in computers, so I was starting to put together the story on Microsoft Word or whatever it was then about the event since he left the house, what happened at the scene, and then I also wanted to engage with the people who were on the ground at the time. Newspapers, I'd mentioned certain people, and I wanted to meet them, and some of them were now elderly. I got to meet even just an RA unit that were in the community at that stage, because the army had said that my granda was a gunman, that had opened fire on them, and so for me, is my granda innocent, or was my granda an RA man? And I wanted to get to the bottom of the story, because he didn't have a military funeral. Like my family, it wasn't in the RA, but that was what the British Army did at that stage to win the media battle.
There were many, many press releases that said, "We've shot a gunman."
No,
who weren't.
100%. And I know I was talking about my anger earlier towards the British. My anger was also aimed at the media. And I know that the army at that stage had their own media teams. And the narrative that went out the first day in the papers where it was an RA gunman was killed in a gun battle.
And it was printed.
It was printed. And then, 4 days later, it was a civilian was shot. And the print's getting smaller and smaller. And even the idea of a gun battle, so there was a ceasefire in Lenadoon at the time. So it was July 72 was a crazy time in our troubles, our conflict. And so for me, getting a sense of the ground, trying to put myself in that scenario. And my granda, he was travelling with my aunt into the shop that stage, and there was barbed wire. He got out of the fan and a bullet whistled by him, and my aunt had said, "God, Frankie," my granda was Frankie McKeown, I should give him his name, "that was awful close." And he's like, "No, it must be far away." And he got out again, and as he was getting back in the car, a bullet just hit him once in the temple of the head, and he died a few hours later. But as I was building up the story, I'm starting to learn things too. When I met people, I met a fellow who was 17 in the area at the stage, and he told me he went out and he prayed the Lord's Prayer and an act of contrition, which is a forgiveness prayer in the Catholic tradition, and which again you've an RA man praying beside my granda going, and he was asking the army for a medikit, and they didn't give a medikit. They turned the guns towards him, and that was a wee moment going, look, as he was dying, there was people there, and I got to meet a priest who done the last rites away down in the ambulance, but it didn't get to ask the army why. I didn't there was people I didn't get to hear, why did you do that? And one of the things, I think for me that was monumental, my granny wouldn't have been an overly, I'd say, educated woman, and I mean she talked about my husband's name was callously taken in a way his life was, and just that word callously. And he was a good man.
So this sense of injustice, how do you move on from that?
Because you have to make a decision. Do I hate? Do I? And you didn't make that decision.
Yeah, I think probably inspired by my granny. Just his name wasn't callously taken. What's the story of Frank McKeown as well? So hearing he was a guy who, as vegetable fan, he would have threw 12 kids in the back of it, brought them to the park to kick a football around. He would have, when there was leftover food in his grocery shops, he would have brought it to the people that didn't have much. He was a good community man. So it was important to kind of get to the bottom of that. And I continued to research and tried to engage with organisations that were starting to emerge, like Relatives for Justice, who were allowing families to kind of express their kind of pain through arts or quilts and stories, and I think one of their staff helped me to put together his story, just the person rather than just the incident. And like that was important for me. But again, back to the youth work and back to even to Youthlink, where there was opportunities then through community relations work. And I know this is funded through Community Relations Council, but even at that stage they were funding the programmes. Where I have in the room, you know, you've got a UVF man, you've got a UDA man, you've British Army, and there's a sort of, not a famous story, but I do joke with this story. I was in a jacuzzi with an NLA man, a UVF man, a British Army guy used to say, and when we're playing Snap, we're playing cards. We had these like laminated, and we're playing cards in a jacuzzi up in Ulster. Was it the Rural College up in Draperstown?
As you do.
And here I am with these people, and we're talking kind of about peace. And the scary thing is, these guys, one had done murder for killing a Catholic, one had done bombings in Ulster Unionist headquarters, one had lost his best mate in an IRA bomb, and you know, had engaged in gunfire with the IRA in South Armagh. Like, and so these men were everything I should have been petrified of, yet I'm in a jacuzzi hearing stories. So like I represent a victim of the Troubles, and at that stage, even like Andrew Rodin was a British soldier. He's been engaged in peace building. He'd be Church of Ireland minister. He's retired from that role. He's now again an advocate for bringing veterans over to explore these issues. But for me, my relationship with him was significant because he represented everything that I like despised or didn't like. And again, with like army people, they're straight talkers, they're direct, and there's no willy softening things up. So befriending him was significant for me as well, because it was an avenue. Even though he didn't shoot my grandfather, he was too young, he gave me insight to what happened. And even just for him, in a way, he validated what my family knew. He says, look, that was wrong. Your grandfather was shot. It was part of the conflict. Almost get on with it. And you know, after I accessed all the records, you know, like the you know, under the 30-year rule where things were released, he helped me to understand what Soldier A, Soldier B, Soldier C saying. He went up to the Shaws Road where the shooting happened, and you know, even remember Andrew saying it was a good shot, and I'm going, I might have swore at him, but what he was saying was like that was a shot that was taken from here.
It was deliberative.
It was intentional to harm. And he says we're trained to kill. Like, and
that wasn't crossfire. That was a deliberate.
Wasn't crossfire, and even like I remember a moment where he came together with me up to my mum and dad's house with my dad's siblings and talking through the coroner's reports, the interviews with soldiers, and even saying things like the soldiers that shot your father didn't write this statement. You know, this was written by military police. Like, these guys are uneducated. They don't use words like unequivocally. They don't use words that have multiple syllables, and helping us to understand how even the stories maybe weren't collaborating in parts, or they weren't adding up in parts and spotting the gaps. But to hear from him, you know, it wasn't right. And even the name, like we were a bit useless in army units. Like, so we always thought it was, like, we thought it was an Englishman, but it was the Royal Scots that shot my grandfather. So instead of having all the anger towards an English person, it was like a young Scottish kid. And I suppose as well, it's important for me, even from a youth work point of view, to be like critical, like to critically analyse situations. And even going the few days beforehand in Lenadown, there was 3 British soldiers shot by Irish sniper gunfire, and they were all 18, 19, 20. And I'm thinking, if the kids that shot my grandfather are 18, 19, 20, they might be trigger happy, they might be, let's get one today. And trying to even see in some shape or form their humanity. And like I did through Andrew want, like, maybe I was being romantic, the idea of meeting. And Northern Ireland wasn't like that. I think South Africa was ahead of the game, but we weren't at the stage where people could meet perpetrators and discuss things and get her head around things. I think the historical inquiries team had helped at a stage, all these different government agencies that are starting to slowly help victims and to put the story together. And they had a beautiful, not a beautiful story, but the RUC man that was investigating McGranda's murder said it was wrong, that this was murder. But then he was killed 6 months later in an IRA bomb. So if he had been alive today, we would have had someone in court. And again, papers and evidence gets lost. But we had this document where the RUC man at the time had thought that the military police were lying, that the soldiers, and he wasn't able to investigate at that stage. It was all done internally. So just getting a broader picture of what happened was important to me. But again, that why and my faith coming to the fore again, going like my dad and me, I'd felt with God in our lives that reconciliation was happening. But to be reconciled, you almost want to meet the other party too. And even Andrew, the British soldier I'm friendly with, he'd be like, Joe, what would you do if you meet them and they say, I'd do the same again? You know, the reality of encounter could be more damaging.
So there's something before. It's that point of forgiveness first, because if the other person isn't there, it's really difficult to find that reconciliation.
Yeah, no, really, it is. Like, I remember, it wasn't at this prayer meeting, but I remember my mum telling me about my dad at this, like, it must have been like a Protestant prayer group that my dad was asked to speak at, and he said, I'm sorry for how my community treated your community, and for anything that I've done that have hurted your community. And I thought for my dad to say that was quite significant, and a real gesture of, you know, sorrow or forgiveness. And for me, I think a sense of being sorry for the stones I've thrown, the words I've said, the hatred I've had, has it's still, I think it's still an ongoing journey. You know what it's like here. You just watch something that can kind of open a bit of a wound again. But for me, like, trying to forgive the person's situation, it was wrong. And words can be like, died in the conflict. It was murder. It was evil. It was an atrocity. It was an accident. So words can change a story or like make it have different meaning. But for me, it happened. Like, and you know, justice is something that the family are trying to seek to find. But also, you know, where's the mercy? I think of Psalm 85, verse 10, you know, where like justice, mercy, peace, compassion all collide, and I think they kiss and hug each other. But for me, I think justice was something even beyond earth or beyond kind of what we know today, and feeling that the search for justice maybe not, people will not get their fill, you know, and it can sometimes lead to more pain, as you know as well.
I mean, I've written chapters for books on the troubles and reporting them, where ultimately we were talking about legacy, and people have all sorts of different legacies in the way they're affected. But will you find that closure? Probably not in the obvious way you immediately think you will with a conviction or an understanding or a meeting. Life's just not like that, and it happens differently, and people learn to live with it. Diane and I are fascinated because you've made that decision long since, that, and you've talked about faith being part of it. My family will not hate. We're looking for reconciliation. In your day-to-day work, running an organisation like you do, and bringing on leaders and developing young people, this could sound trite, but does all this stuff live with you, or is it just part of you? You can't. I don't think anybody could live thinking through all that every day when they make a decision to do something else that's about peace building and reconciliation.
No, I think it's very much there, and it's a motivating factor. So for me, I've been lucky with Youthlink. Spent 10 years with them as a youth worker that's engaged in all this, working with combatants, doing community relations programs, bringing young people and adults together. I lectured on a degree for 7 years, and now I'm in this leadership position where I'm meant to be leading the organisation forward into the next chapter. And in many ways, society's been like, oh, we've moved on, young people aren't talking about this anymore. Yet the reality is, 80% of our housing estates are segregated. Our education system we could look at as being segregated. Marriages across community are not happening. We live pretty much separate lives, and it's not apart from maybe some of the nicer like middle classes. There is a wee bit of mixing, but division's quite real still, and we've get on with it. And for me, you don't want to be bringing young people or adults back to the past. But I drive by, David Irvine's mural in East Belfast. Those that don't remember the past are doomed to repeat it. And I think in certain ways we are repeating it by kind of this sort of benign apartheid where we live separate lives.
To be fair, it's a big deal that you even drive up the Beersbridge Road.
But it is, and maybe for, you're right. So for me, I've kind of, dispelled kind of, I've moved beyond. I've got the confidence. I remember with Youthlink, we'd ran out of flags for our emblems box, and it was over in Union Jack shop and down at the bottom of Newton Road.
Of course you were.
And if people know it, like China was the guy that runs it. I was in the Union Jack shop and looking some flags just for a box, and so I was behind a Union flag, the Ulster banner, and things that I wouldn't get in West Belfast and the Sinn Féin shop. And he was saying to me, oh, we've tricolours there too if you want them. And I was like, how much are they? And he's like, £5. I'm like, oh, there's £7 up in the Sinn Féin shop. Gives one of them too. And I got an Ulster flag too. So he says the tricolours are one of they're good, popular during July. So they are. But even been in them spaces, like for me, I feel okay being uncomfortable. Like there's something about, like even when you're in a jacuzzi with people, like that was uncomfortable. But I'm drawn to those that are different. So if you're ever at a conference and you look different to me, you'll find me sitting beside you because I want to know. And I'm one of them people, like Will, where, I remember my wife was just embarrassed. I was up in Buncrannon in India, and I was asking the waitress, oh, what part of India is she's from? She's like, I'm from Ballybuffet. Where I'm curious about people's heritage, their name. I think that's a direct result of not wanting to be someone that lives separately, but being connected to the wider humanity. So in Youthlink, our coffee time, we have conversations about the different churches, like walks of life. So we have the banter and laugh at our differences. So we one of my colleagues recently lost their brother, but you've some of the Protestant colleagues going to Catholic church, and what's the incense about? What's this about? Why do you have like the open coffin, at the wake? And there's learning there too. And even our board of trustees, like they come from our 4 churches. It's not normal, actually, other than the workplace, to be together, but to be together in the space where people have a shared faith. There's still not that many structures that allow for that to come together, other than organic friendship. So for me, holding together that tension is really important, and I think our churches should be honoured for taking that risk. But again, I think they've to ask themselves the question, where are we at with reconciliation? Is it easier to stay within the confines of our church walls and fences, or do we go out to meet and greet? And, people like Martin McGill and Steve Stockman are a great example of that, but also throughout the country. We've got Oma Churches Forum and Enniskillen Churches Forum, where men and women of faith are getting together. Just last week we had something in Newton Ards where the churches had come together, and it's good, it's still happening. And these were the forefathers of our peace process, ordinary women and men that got together. And that's, for me, in the workplace, well, it's kind of trying to live that out. But as every charity at this stage, where you're fighting to survive sometimes, you're applying for funding, you're getting distracted with funding, and it's trying to stay true to our cause as well.
But even in your workplace, you're talking really there about those building relationships of trust. And, you're now modelling, that in what you're doing. I know you've done it internationally, and one of the things that really struck me when you were telling the story there, in terms of people who had actually said they were sorry from the other community, whether it was the RUC man or the guy from the army who'd, said, that wasn't right, and helped you to understand and taken you on a journey. I think that idea of standing in the gap is really important, where someone from the other community takes the place of the person who you can't get to say sorry. It may not give you that complete sense of justice, but at least, you know, you get a sense that there are people from that other community who are different and who care.
Yeah, 100%. Like Diane, and even I do like that idea of standing in the gap. Like a lecture in our degree programme would say 90% of the students in our degree programme would have been from the Reformed tradition, and I used to regularly come out of the closet as Catholic, and it would be disempower them, to avoid them maybe saying the wrong thing, but also then for them to be curious. And I like the idea of you know being curious, being present, and being transformed. But that idea of being okay with asking difficult questions. Like I, as a young youth worker, I used to go up to Summer Madness, and people used to say, "Oh, are you saved?" or "Why do you like worship Mary?" or "Why do you like?" And I felt and I don't think I felt attacked, but I felt like, flip, you know, am I saved? You know, these. So every time I'm reaching out and going to the churches and trying to befriend like the people from different Christian traditions, but people that are then asking me, "Am I saved?" And you know, it's forcing me more, not forcing me, but like reading my Bible more, and I always loved when I did do cross-community work, when you went to, Autumn Soul, or you'd all these young people maybe with lovely silver Bibles, and, you know, and we had a wee small battered torn type thing. And I loved kind of, through journeying with people, you get to know, like I feel like I've got to know God more through my faith, and a wee bit of a give and take, and kind of wrestling, asking difficult questions. And for me, the workplace is like that. But standing in the gap is, for me, is really important, and I want their staff and people in the churches to ask difficult questions, to be uncomfortable, and not to be a wishy-washy kind of Christian that kind of, I'm okay with this, I'm okay with that, but to be okay in your own kind of, like, bloom where you're planted, be okay there's in the roots that you've kind of developed through your family, but be curious and try to understand the other side. You know, seek first to understand before we're understood.
Yeah, and it seems to me that's all about relationship, because you can't have those conversations if you don't have that relationship, whether it's, well, of course, both with God and with somebody else who is not the same as you. I love that fact that you love to stand and, you know, beside the person who's a wee bit different to find out more. I think you've sort of talked about this already, but we always ask every guest, they think of, you know, those people who are in that chief executive position or in that leadership position in the Ford Church. They're the people who do it, or the Steve Stockman or the Martin McGill. But actually, it's ordinary people, as you say. So we ask, what advice would you give to just anybody who's listening who just wants to make a start? Do something different to bring that transformation.
I think for me, it's about saying yes to possibility. Like, I really do think, you know, like whether it's a nun in the pub, it's saying yes. It's the opportunity to engage in youth work. It's saying yes, and like even volunteer and just saying yes and being exposed to what you don't know. You know, and that kind of willingness to learn. Like I very much am, and hopefully my staff would say to you, if they were here, like I'm pretty much an ordinary person, and I do get a bit of imposter syndrome by having this CEO title, which. Like, and many times if you meet me out and about at a conference, I say, I currently lead the organisation. I try and stay away from...
Or work for.
I work for, like, but I really do just think that concept of us all being leaders, and we've all something to offer. Like, for me, I genuinely believe that everyone has a part to play. Everyone has a ministry or a gift that they can offer, a bit like an orchestra, but saying yes to possibility and not letting fear like hold you back. Say yes to possibility and trust God. You know, just like let God kind of enter in and throw all your junk onto him and say, God, here I am, over to you.
Joe, thank you so much. We've really appreciated you being so vulnerable as well and just telling us your story.
These aren't easy stories to tell, but you've been so honest and so clear about it. Thank you so much for coming on Inspired to Act.
And thanks for listening to everybody out there, and tell us your thoughts or comments about Inspired to Act. You can send a text from your podcast app and we'd love to hear from you.
And you can learn about the work of Thrive Ireland at thriveIreland.org. Find Thrive Ireland on Instagram and Facebook too. There's a YouTube channel and all that kind of stuff that people have nowadays.
And we'll be back with you very soon. But for now, bye.
Bye.